Good afternoon, everybody. So today we will tackle this chapter by Semenza, particularly on the seminar paper, because for one thing, your philosophy majors and writing papers is part of of the basic competencies expected of the graduates of the AB philosophy program, as stated in, I think, in the CHED PSG for AB philosophy. So yeah, it's a requirement for AB philosophy graduates that you learn how to write, not just write, but write quality, rigorous philosophy papers. But other than being a requirement, there's also a utility when you embrace writing as a lifestyle, as a as an activity that is perhaps part of your hobbies because it's an exercise of the mind. When you write something, you are forced to um, articulate the ideas that you may have. And in the process of articulation, sometimes we see the weaknesses of our own ideas. So it's an exercise of self improvement because we're able to see um, weaknesses in or in gaps in how we think, and yeah, we can therefore improve if we want to. So that's one thing. And another thing is if you are articulate, not only in speaking, but also in writing, there's also skill that you can use anywhere. You can convince people of your viewpoints. You can use your capacity to speak, to write, to defend the rights of people who need defending, those who can not defend themselves. You can use it to negotiate with people. Yeah. So yeah, learning to write is a practice in learning to speak properly, and communication is of course a very um, important skill to have. So yeah, we're in chapter 5 of Semenza. The title is the seminar paper. So I'll just be reading the chapter, and then um, perhaps I'll explain along the way. And I hope after this discussion or this recording, this is one way, man. This is something that you cannot yet interact with in a way that I can hear you. So I hope you can share your thoughts later on, especially with the discussion questions that I'll be posting later on. So Semenza begins with almost every serious graduate course in the humanities culminates in a final written assignment that I refer to in this paper, in this chapter. It's called as the seminar paper. And that's the same as the term paper that I've been asking you to write for this philosophy of education class. It continues, because the seminar paper both allows you to demonstrate your knowledge of the relevant course material and prepares you for the difficult tasks, dissertation or thesis writing and scholarly publishing. It might accurately be understood as the sine qua non of your academic training. What's sine qua non? It's that without which it's the necessary condition that makes um, your academic training really academic training. In short, we could even say you're not educated if you do not learn the basic and important skill of writing. So it's the necessary condition. to say that you have been trained academically. You are able to write well. He continues. Nonetheless, for most graduate students, and even undergraduate students, confronting the seminar paper each semester is akin to launching an Arctic expedition without a compass or a map. Right? You may have some sense of where you want to go, but painfully little guidance about how to get there. Right? Although there exists no universally applicable set of instructions for writing a successful seminar paper, especially across disciplines, you can take certain steps that will help you master the form. What's the form? These are the steps. The form are the steps which, in ideal situations, might even lead to publication eventually. The chapter focuses on the perils and pitfalls of seminar paper writing and how to avoid them. Since why students approach writing seminar papers just as they approach writing articles, this chapter serves as a supplement to chapter 10, where um, Semenza talks about the publication process. So in this chapter, there are how many sections? I think nine. I think there are nine sections. It begins with the value of emulation. Okay, so you have somebody or whom you imitate. That's emulation. Then, second, he proceeds with the construction of a reading list. Next, the organization of materials. Then, the note-taking process and the formulation of an argument. Then, the context of an argument, the evidence, the argument. And he talks about the importance of your personal voice and the revision process towards publication. It gives you the overview of what he talks about in this chapter. So let's start with the first one. In the first section, titled "The Value of Emulation," he talks about, um, yeah, the significance of having a model. You draw an example from, okay, when writing your own work. So he writes, especially because of the myth in academia that quote originality should be the goal of all scholarly research, the educational value of systematic imitation often gets overlooked. And yeah, that's actually true because usually we look for an original contribution in any research article, which is necessary, yes, but you cannot get at the stage where you can contribute something original if you have not yet mastered the existing field. You can only produce something original if you have already mastered, you are able to synthesize the existing knowledge about that field that you're trying to write about. You're going to contribute something original to, right? So part of gaining mastery is where you emulate somebody who is an expert in the field, right? So he continues. This is unfortunate since savvy teachers and students have long recognized that imitation is a starting point for learning in many pedagogical systems. Okay, good. So yeah, it's just imitation is a starting point. It's not the end point. We will not. We do not want you to become just master um, imitators, right? Mimic existing systems of knowledge and even thinkers. You aim for originality eventually, but the starting point is emulation, imitation. He says, as we will see shortly, the academic definition of originality needs to be understood within certain highly specific contexts. But first, it will be important to discuss how you should envision the seminar paper, a skill that will require a certain degree of familiarity with the form. Right? He continues, because scholars do not publish seminar papers, we must look to article-length essays as the most appropriate models for the approximately 20-page papers we're typically asked to write in our graduate courses. And why shouldn't this be the case? Many professors, after all, specify, even in their syllabi, that papers should be understood as practice runs for scholarly publishing. For example, each of my graduate students discovers in his first day in my class that a quote, 20 to 25 page potentially publishable file paper will largely determine the final grade of the course. Indeed, such language was the rule rather than the exception in most of my courses as a graduate student. And it goes without saying that any student enrolled in a graduate program for longer than a semester is likely to have encountered it before. So, um, yeah, professors typically tell their students, especially in humanities courses, that a term paper is required, no, by the end of the semester, and much of the grade will be based on the term paper, right? And one of the criteria is whether it's ready for publishing, whether it has potential for publication as a journal article. He then continues. Of course, many professors clinging to the outdated and somewhat irresponsible apprenticeship model of graduate education deliberately shun such language in both their syllabi and their classrooms. More often than not, such professors are doing what they believe is best for their students because they assume that the emphasis on the professional development of graduate students is only damaging and premature. They do what they can to protect them from pre-professional pressure. Although many students do, in fact, feel overwhelmed by the emphasis in today's graduate programs, publishing and conferencing, ignorance about how to publish rather than recognition of the need to publish is probably the cause of their anxiety. The facts here are simple. Avoiding the realities of today's academic market, which demands publication, may make you feel less anxious in graduate school, but you will feel considerably more anxious later or later on if you are unable to land a job because you have not published. So, what are you trying to say? He said, he's saying, some professors will not pressure you to write, no? Because they think that writing a paper is something that will only be required of you when you will already be teaching, no, as faculty in a university. However, Semenza is saying here that saving you from the anxiety now might open you to anxiety later on when you're already looking for a job because, um, of course, between two applicants for a specific academic position, if one has no publication and and the other one has a publication in the top journal, most likely that ceteris paribus, no, all other things being equal, they are uh, roughly equivalent in all other respects. Then, of course, the person who has a solid track record at publication most likely be higher, right? The, your anxiety when you're in the application process will definitely be minimized if you have a track record, a portfolio that you can uh, draw your confidence from, right? So he continues, even if you are lucky enough to secure a position, you may find yourself laboring frantically to do what should have become second nature in order to produce the publications necessary for tenure. So suppose you have already landed into a job, an academic job. If even if at that stage you are still not yet habituated into the culture of writing, if it will, if you're already teaching And that's still a time when you will try to learn, no, the art of writing for the first time, the craft of writing for the first time. Of course, that will become very hard for you because you're saying the skill and the habit of writing, difficult process of writing, should have been already acquired, no, when you were still in school. Remember, in Aristotle, diba? Aristotle distinguishes between actions and habits. An action in itself um, does not become habit unless you do it over and over again. You try to cultivate it over and over again until such a point that its difficulty goes away. It becomes second nature. It becomes natural to you. And the process of making writing second nature to you does not come easily. You have to be chiseled into it. Because, for instance, you might have been asked to write in some of your earlier subjects, no? Way back, for example, in basic education. Perhaps you were asked to write essays, formal themes, right? Even perhaps you were part of campus paper, school paper. But there's a distinction in the genre between the essays that you've been writing before, those papers, those news articles that you've been writing before, and the seminar paper, publishable article. Very, very different. So, yeah, on the one hand, perhaps you might have learned something way back, but we must not pretend as though those skills are the exact same skills that you will need when you write an academic paper. Again, these are different skills. So he continues. My advice, therefore, is that you embrace the seminar paper as a means of preparation for scholarly publishing. Uh, if you look at the established philosophy professors in the country, most of them have a strong publication track record. You talk about, for example, Paulo Bolaños, UST, who was, by the way, very vocal during the recent public hearing by CHED regarding the proposed revision of GE curriculum. He was very vocal then. And he's in the position to really speak, for the humanities and social sciences professors across the country, faculty across the country, because he has a strong record. He has written so much about critical theory. Stockman. He's written about articles, journal articles about Adorno, Deleuze, no? Critical theory in general. That's his major field of expertise. So another one, we have Jeffrey Okai, who has written the book, I think his book with this one, Critical Theory at the Margins. There's many books, particularly about Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse, who's one of the critical theorists, or even people I disagree with politically, but also this track record like Christopher Ryan Mabolo, who has written a lot of scholarly articles in Scopus Index. These are listed in the top indexing lists, journal articles. So yeah, they have established track records, and you become perhaps a philosopher that way. At least that's the contemporary conception of a philosopher. Talk about you can search, for example, Joven Joaquin. I think is that Joseph Joven Joaquin or Joshua? Yeah, J.J. Joaquin of LaSalle, who has written so many articles, logic, so many articles on philosophy of religion, metaphysics, and even ethics. So many articles. So you become a philosopher by writing. That's the contemporary understanding of what it means to be a philosopher. You write. So you your activity is practice, no? A simulation of something that will have become second nature to you. Time. In my experience, I will not say that writing has become second nature to me. I'm still struggling. I'm still trying to learn how to do it. But along the way, notwithstanding my many failures in terms of the innumerable rejected articles that I have submitted, at least a few of them have been accepted by some journals, and yeah, I've seen the light of day. They have been read and cited as well. So the goal is to make it natural for us, culture of writing. Semenza says, one positive and somewhat paradoxical side effect of such an approach is the diminishment of anxiety as a result of an enhanced sense of purpose and direction. So, again, one positive and somewhat paradoxical side effect of such an approach is the diminishment of anxiety as a result of an enhanced sense of purpose and direction. As one of my best fellow students confesses, envisioning pupils as particles transforms them from hoops to which one must jump into serious and potentially useful exercises. So quote there, quote, I found that I only achieved the degree of success when I began thinking of my seminar papers as pre-publication attempts rather than as papers to get finished for the class. So yeah, when I think that's really the case for me as well. In graduate school, in my first MA program, it's been normal. We have been asked to write term papers. And for example, one term paper I wrote was on Lantugi, no? When I was studying in the subject Advanced Pedagogy, Social Studies, under Dr. Inyashan. And that was developed into my thesis eventually. And after the coursework, I had to start writing my thesis, and then eventually that turned into a book. No? My first book, my only book so far. And even when writing my paper, I already had that vision. I already envisioned to turn this just class requirement into something else, a term paper, because I'm lazy. I'm a lazy writer. I would rather just read and read, do something else rather than write. No, and it's this intention that I transform, or I repurpose this term paper into something publishable. It's that which drives me to actually complete the paper and then submit. Without that bigger goal, I would not have usually finished the paper in the first place, just even for submission to the professor for the third paper. So that's what the student is saying here. He said, I guess the difference in my mind has to do more with the preparation for the paper than anything else. I going to original sources rather than these books, doing the range of scholarship in the particular field in which I'm working, translating languages. It is very, very hard, right? Finding the best or standard editions for each text. So when you begin with the intention in mind, the intention being publication of scholarly article, when that's your intention and you see the writing of your term paper just as a stage towards that bigger goal, the student is saying that naturally you will be forced, no? Or you'll be motivated even to do it with rigor. You will not just read secondary sources, but you will go back to the original sources. For example, I have read some of your initial drafts, and I upload the fact that you have already written is the concept paper beforehand. But if you've read the journal articles that I have posted in Google Classroom, you can use them as the benchmark. You will see how when you, for example, talk about Hannah Arendt, or when you talk about any philosopher, usually the author always goes back to the specific work of that author, of that philosopher. For example, I think one of you has written about Freire in the banking model. So it's not enough to mention that this idea of the banking model of education has been criticized by Freire in the pedagogy of the oppressed. It's important that you do that, but um, you must present evidence in your paper that your interpretation of his critique of the banking model is accurate. And therefore, in philosophy articles, usually it's natural to cite um, verbatim full excerpts of or quotes from the original source. For example, you have to cite the specific page of the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed you're drawing from. It's not enough to refer to a blog article or a research article somewhere. You have to go back to the book written by the thinker that you're engaging with. Okay? You have to be specific about which edition of the book you're referring to, the publication year, who was the publisher. Okay, you have to go back to which page, which chapter, and you contextualize that specific idea in that page with the overall argument in the entire book. Okay, so I understand that's very hard to do. It takes time to go back to the original material, but as the author is arguing here, Semenza is arguing that if your goal is only to get that paper published for class as a term paper, usually you will not bother to deal with that difficult stuff. But if your intention at the outset is to get published, no? Not just in any journal, but in top journals in your field, and you um, understand and you appreciate the contribution and the benefits, the rewards of the feeling of satisfaction, getting your work out in top journal. If that's your goal, then you'll be motivated to do more than what you're usually accustomed to do, which is just relying on secondary material. For example, one of you talked about techne, the Greek concept of techne and phronesis, right? It's not enough to mention that the concept of techne and phronesis are Greek concepts. You have to be specific which thinker has talked about techne and which thinker has talked about phronesis. And not only specific about which thinker has talked about those concepts, but in which works, again, in what page, no, in those works, which edition, yeah. And if you're citing the original text, usually you will have to cite, for example, the original Greek um, citation, right? And you have to cite the author, I know the translator, if you're gonna quote an interpretation or in English translation of that text. So You will do that for every concept that you're trying to cite, that you're talking about. You in philosophy papers, you cannot just introduce a concept without explaining it. You have to explain it along the way. No? You use big words, big concepts. They must not just be written there, assuming that um, you can just proceed, no, with your next sentence without taking the time to linger a little bit and explain that concept along the way. All right. Everything in a everything in a philosophy articles must be clearly explained, must be traced back to the primary source. And the primary source, of course, is the original thinker himself, not some other scholar talking about that thinker. It's not enough to cite, for example, a Filipino author, no? A textbook author talking about Heidegger. You read Heidegger himself, right? Because the Filipino scholar who talks about Heidegger is already a secondary source. Yes, you may engage with secondary sources. You must not take their interpretations and their claims at face value, no? Because you can build on them, you can emulate them even at times. But of course, there will be limits to that as well, because you will inherit the mistakes that they might have in attempt to grapple with the text. So this idea of grappling with the text, that's an essential skill. It's a requisite for writing. We call that close reading. Close reading. You linger with a certain paragraph. You dissect word by word, sentence by sentence, clause by clause, sentence by sentence. You try to make sense of what it says overall, and how that text forces us to revise our understanding of the world that the author has been trying to build, and even how that forces us to think the world in itself. It's gonna take time. It's gonna go. So, yeah, Semenza continues. Unsurprisingly, the student not only has turned in consistently excellent seminar papers, meaning the student who said that he intends to uh, submit each term paper into a journal article. Semenza said, the student has consistently been submitting excellent term papers. He has also published several articles as a pre-dissertation student. So that's really the goal. Before you write your thesis, it's best if you have um, done a lot of practice writing work, because by the time that you'll be writing your thesis, of course, it would not be so much of a barrier for you because you had much experience before writing articles, right? So, in my case, for example, I was able to finish my thesis, for my master's degree in a roughly and relatively short amount of time. It was quick. It was not was not fast. It took me many months, but comparatively, my classmates are still the classmates who have my classmates who have been um, my batchmates in the MA program. Most of them are still in the um, thesis writing phase right now. Even those who have started the program before I did. What's that the case? It's because before the thesis writing phase, I was already trying to get those smaller ideas published beforehand. So yeah, practicing writing will really help you make your life easier later on. He continues. Often what distinguishes excellent from mediocre seminar papers is the mature student's knowledge of what published work actually looks like. Yeah, it's actually true. So you compare you compare your own paper with an existing already published journal article in the field. You can really see the differences. For example, your own paper might have just, for example, in a singular page, might have just one or even no citation at all. But in a research article, usually they might have even five in-text citations in just one page, even 10, even more. Depends on the type of paper. It depends on the field as well. Although it's not about the number, no, it's about the depth of engagement with those works as well. But there's also a minimum in your quantity as well. You cannot submit a journal article just with three articles cited. Although yeah, if you have to choose between quality and quantity, go with quality. But that doesn't mean that quantity is immaterial as well. So it continues. While professors and advisors can help you notice certain typical characteristics of published writings, the time that you spend in the library reading and thinking about how to emulate these essays will prove far more valuable. So do not depend on your professors, your advisors telling you that these are the criteria, these are the steps in writing, these are the criteria of what a good writing, a good term paper is, the characteristics of a good term paper. No, you do not wait for us to point that out. You spend your time in the library because it's sometimes, most of the time, when you yourselves notice the distinctions, the characteristics, the insight will hit you more, will strike you more deeply. Because it's a first person encounter with what makes a good quality. So he said, my student knows that he should seek out the most highly respected editions of primary works because respectable journalists simply do not publish authors who use modern English translations of Beowulf to research the plot. Diba? You cannot just cite any translation. You cite the standard, the standard translation of works. For example, Heidegger. Heidegger's Being and Time has been translated in English a number of times already, but the first translation into English, the Macquarie translation, is still the standard translation even up to now. Some will say there's no other translation that compares to it, even the modern ones. We always tend to go back to that Macquarie translation. If we talk about the Summa Theologica of Aquinas, um, I think the English translation from the Latin of the, how do you call that? The English Dominican friar, something like that. I think that's treated as the standard translation of um, the Summa. And some journal editors will not accept any other translation other than those standard translations. So you have to seek out those standard translations of the thinker that you're trying to use as your lens. He said, from reading journal articles closely, you will learn much about how authors formulate provocative claims how they build upon the research of other scholars, what sorts of materials and methods they use to persuade their audiences, and how much evidence they bring to bear on their own arguments. By focusing actively on more than the rhetorical elements of such articles, you will also learn much about the mechanics and even the politics of scholarly work in your field. So do not just look at the rhetorical elements of articles, not just how they write it, um, how confident they look, in how confident they dress up their claims, no? Supposed contribution of the articles. Also the mechanics, for example, the citation style. For example, APA 7, although that's a citation style typically used in fields like psychology and education, it's not usually used in philosophy. Many or most, perhaps not most, but many journal articles in philosophy use the Chicago citation style, perhaps the footnote style, or the in-text citation style. So, yeah, citation styles tend to be discipline specific, right? So that's part of the mechanics that you will learn by reading works in your field. Furthermore, you might also learn about the politics of scholarly work in your field. Now, it's one thing that you must know. If your reference list is filled with articles from journals that are not Scopus indexed, or likely than not, your article will be rejected. Rejected in a philosophy journal that is indexed with Scopus. So it's part of the politics of scholarly work. Diba? If you do not know that, then you might be tempted to just cite any article that you might find in Google Scholar, not caring about the journal, whether it's published, if it's Scopus Index or not. But if you discover, you already know the politics of scholarly work in your field, that only articles published in specific journals are acceptable to the editors. Then of course that shapes, your practices in how you cite and who to cite, right? He continues. How many pages long is the average essay in the top three philosophy journals? How large is the average bibliography in an essay on the development of American labor unions in the 19th century history? Which scholars, which scholars' names repeatedly come up in discussions of Moliere's writings? So who are the, in short, who are the established scholars, interpreters that author? Which style, Chicago, MLA, APA, tends to be most respected by editors of Spanish literature journals? Your ability to answer such questions will help you to avoid seeming naive or ignorant, but the way things work in the culture of your particular field. All right. So, yeah, um, we're nearing the end part of the discussion on emulation, the value of emulation. Semenza then continues. The next section focuses on how much to read, how much to read for a seminar paper. But we should reiterate some of the basic claims we have made. One key to your success in negotiating the seminar paper A paper assignment will be your ability to keep in perspective the larger reasons for writing such papers in the first place. Likely, publication in a scholarly journal. Most important of which is to develop your knowledge of and ability to construct the fundamental unit of written scholarly work. It's the basic unit. The article is the basic unit of scholarly work. Peer-reviewed article. Not just any article, but the double-blind, peer-reviewed, or refereed article. What do you mean by double-blind? In a good and non in a good journal, when you submit a paper, you will have to submit it in in an anonymous form. The reviewers must not know who the authors of the papers that they're reviewing are, because uh, knowing who the author of the paper you're reviewing is might influence your decision whether to accept or reject the paper, right? Of course, you might, even if you don't want it, you might be tempted to accept the paper just because it's written by your friend, no, by your peer. So that's one level of blindness, no, that the reviewer does not know who the author of the paper they're reviewing is. And on the other hand, the author is also blind. What do you mean by that? The author does not know who the reviewers of his paper are. That's one way to ensure integrity, so that the author will not chase, no, the reviewer simply because the reviewer is telling him brutal truths about how bad his paper is, diba? Perhaps, perhaps the author will take it personally, no? To avoid that, to ensure objectivity, that's the value of double blind here. He continues, quote, by imagining what your work will look like in one of the top journals in your field, rather than in a pile on your professor's desk, you will gain an immediate sense of how to proceed in your research based on your evaluation of the essays that have already been published therein. This goal-oriented sort of approach is likely to energize you by giving you a sense of purpose and drawing out the importance of the course-related work that you do as a graduate student. It may even result in some unexpected professional achievements. Systematic emulation of sound published work might, with some degree of accuracy, be called the starting point of all written research. The editor of an excellent journal told me when I was an MA student that I should be spending at least 2 hours in the library each week simply reading recent published volumes that are journals in my field. I would enthusiastically pass along his advice, his excellent advice to you. Okay. You read what has been written. You read not just anything, but the, the articles in the top journals in your field. For example, your term paper is on philosophy of education. And there are a few top journals in philosophy of education. I will just show you a few of them. Forgive me, I do not have premium access to Scopus, so yeah, so it be a bit more roundabout. But so, for example, I will just search philosophy of education. This is Scopus, by the way, the indexing body that I've been telling you about, which is usually treated as a benchmark of quality work in the field. So again, philosophy of education. You will find here a lot of journals in philosophy of education. For example, we have philosophy of education. Um, immediately jumped into education philosophy. Here, no, there are five results of articles that bear the terms philosophy and education explicitly, and yeah, they are in different quartiles, meaning they are in different we might say degrees, no, of their prestige in terms of how scholarly they are. So, for example, the first one, number one, is educational philosophy and theory. It's in the 94% percentile. That means of all journals in the field, it is in the uh, top 94 level. If you rank them from 1 to 100, it's in uh, the highest quartile, Olympic quartile, the top 25%. Particularly, it's in the 94% level, with 100% as the highest. The second article here, the second journal here is Studies in Philosophy in Education. Encourage you to just go to Google and just search these titles out. And even the Journal of Philosophy of Education, where, for example, um, Rowena Palacios, one of the readings we had was by Palacios. It was published here, this journal. Regarding educational philosophy and theory, um, the collective writing project on the state of Filipino philosophy of education was published there. Then there are also other ones. For example, this number 4, Philosophy of Music Education Review, and Science, Philosophy, History, and Education. Those still are okay journals, but yeah, not in the top 3. You focus on the top 3, you go to the top 3. Educational philosophy and theory, studies in philosophy and education, journal of philosophy and education. So yeah, I think I have to end there. So the gist, no, of this section, the first section, really is the value of emulation. You cannot jump into writing a good paper in terms of originality if you do not know, if you do not have exemplars, models of what good writing in your field is like, and therefore you emulate those scholars. The professor, Charles Darwin University, the name of Tara Brabazon, talked about how before you get anything written, you must be able to pinpoint 5 names, at least 5 names of the scholars that are still actively writing on the field that you're trying to write about. You must have specific names, or else your paper will not be situated in the most recent developments in the field. For example, when I tried to write about historical thinking, the concept of historical thinking, I had to engage with the scholars who are still actively writing in the field. Therefore, I had to master the publications of Peter Seixas, who was just recently died, Sam Weinberg, who in the Philippines, scholars that have been writing about that include, for instance, Wensley Reyes, who else? Levesque, certain Levesque, I forgot the first name, and Jeffrey Noakes. So I had at least five scholars, and I tried to read everything that I could read that they've written. Of course, there's still more, but more scholars writing in the field. But I had to. I only had limited time, so I had to focus on the top 5. I tried to engage with their works, and it's only after I have mastered. I think I have mastered at least, had working knowledge at least, articles that they've written, the books that they have written. Only then was I able to craft a proposal for my thesis way back in the undergraduate degree. Or for my master's, it was about uh, teaching models and agonist teaching models, particularly like Pugi. So I had to look for the top scholars in that field. For example, in the Visayas region, one of the scholars really, perhaps even he was even called the god of teaching models, was Leonardo Inosan. So it's one of the scholars that I really had to draw a lot from. On agonist political theory, I had to read Chantal Mouffe and I forgot the name of the husband. So Mouffe and the other one for agonism. Then for the people who tried to apply agonist political philosophy into pedagogy, there's this scholar, English scholar with the name of, I think it was Tervagsong, who had written about agonist teaching. There's still another one, forget the name of. And then because attempted to use Kademirian hermeneutic phenomenology as my design, I had to read the method article by Alsai and Coyne on Kademirian hermeneutic phenomenology. That's four. And uh, because I argued that the gist, the essence really of Nagdogi involves, especially the assertiveness part among the debaters. Part of that is the Bisaya virtue of Iso. So I had to read the works of George Borinaga, San Carlos. So at least five. I tried to emulate what they have written, but I did not stop there. I used what I understood from their works to craft my own argument, to do my own fieldwork, and yeah, to try to contribute something new to the field. So I hope you learned something from this discussion, and I look forward to continue reading your work. And yeah, see you next time.